was 60 when I noticed it, the itch. Not the kind that comes after you spend an afternoon trimming roses barehanded, or the kind you get when winter's dry breath has overstayed its welcome. No, this one was quieter, and yet somehow louder, persistent. It began on my lower legs, just a small annoyance at first. I'd scratch during the evening news, thinking it was just dry skin or maybe the detergent Mary had switched to. But it didn't go away. It lingered, and eventually, I started wondering if my body was trying to whisper something to me. That's the thing about aging, it doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it knocks in the form of silence, or a little itch. Back then, I was still convinced I had time. Time to fix the roof. Time to retire properly. Time to take better care of myself. Just not today. But my legs were telling a different story. After dinner, when I'd settle into my recliner, the itching grew stronger. Lotion didn't help. Cool water gave relief for maybe 10 minutes. It was around that time I stopped walking as much. Said it was the weather. Said it was my knees. But truthfully, I didn't want to admit I was slowing down. One evening, I watched the way the light fell on my shin. It looked thinner, almost papery. I pressed my fingers to the skin and noticed how slow the color returned. Poor circulation, maybe. I remembered my father's legs toward the end. How they bruised easily. How he used to say they felt cold even in July. The body has its own language. We're just not always fluent in it. I went to see a doctor after some nudging from my daughter. Nothing dramatic, just a checkup. They ran a few tests and told me my blood flow wasn't great. Peripheral artery disease, they said. Common in older folks. The kind of thing that creeps in while you're busy pretending you're fine. I didn't realize how much the legs did for the heart. Turns out, they're not just for moving you around, they're part of the whole circulatory symphony. If they're struggling, everything else starts to play off key. And I felt it in my tiredness, in the heaviness after short walks, in the quiet dread I didn't name. But this isn't a sad story. It's a slow one. And slow is not the same as hopeless. After the diagnosis, I started walking again. Not far, just down the block, then back. The itching didn't vanish overnight, but something softened in me. The act of movement felt like a kind of prayer, an agreement with life that I was still here, still listening. Funny thing is, when you start listening to your body, you begin to hear things you ignored for years. The next whisper came from my back, right between the shoulder blades, that impossible-to-reach place. I thought it was the chair I'd been sitting in, or maybe my undershirt. But it followed me from room to room, house to house. A soft reminder that something wasn't quite right. It's strange, the places the body chooses to speak from. The middle of the back isn't where you'd expect trouble. But it's where the liver and kidneys send their early signals in subtle ways, when they're overloaded, when they're tired, when they're asking for mercy. Back then, I was taking too many shortcuts. Too much salt, too little water. I'd gone from cooking real meals to reheating whatever was easiest. Beer on weekends, sometimes on weekdays too. Nothing excessive, but just enough to tilt the balance. My skin started to dry out. I woke up at night, scratching without knowing why. There was no rash, no visible reason, just a restlessness that lived under the skin. My wife noticed before I did. "Maybe your liver's tired," she said one morning. I laughed it off, but something in her tone stuck with me. You see, we think of the skin as the surface, the final layer. But in truth, it's the mirror of what lies beneath. When the liver or kidneys falter, the body doesn't shout. It itches. I eventually went in for tests. My liver enzymes were slightly elevated. Nothing alarming, but not nothing either. The doctor advised moderation. More water, less processed food, watch the medications. It wasn't a sentence, it was an invitation. I started drinking more water, added lemon for taste. I swapped out the microwave meals for simple soups, made peace with cooking again. It wasn't about turning back time, it was about not speeding it up. Looking back, I think those itches were trying to return me to myself, like little taps on the shoulder, a reminder that even after 60, we're still in conversation with our own bodies, still learning the language. And sometimes that language comes in whispers that only the still-hearted can hear. There was another kind of itch that crept in, not on my skin exactly, but just beneath the surface of my thoughts. It began on the back of my neck, spread across the scalp, like a faint static I couldn't turn off. I blamed it on the shampoo at first, switched to the unscented kind, bought a softer pillowcase, even tried one of those fancy scalp brushes the grandkids talk about. But nothing seemed to help. The itch wasn't outside. It was coming from somewhere deeper, like nerves firing without reason, like something unresolved trying to rise. That was a season in my life when I was carrying a lot I hadn't named yet. Retirement had been official for over a year, but it didn't feel like freedom, it felt like disorientation. I had spent 4 decades waking up for something, showing up somewhere, and suddenly, I wasn't expected. I still remember sitting on the porch one evening, scratching the back of my head while the sun dipped behind the trees. My hands moved without thought, but my mind was restless. I kept thinking, is this it? Is this how it goes now? Quiet dinners, old sitcoms, and doctor appointments? I wasn't unhappy, just unsettled. It took me a long time to admit I was lonely, not for people necessarily, but for purpose, for rhythm, for some sense that I was still being used by life, not just watching it happen from the sidelines. And I suspect now that the itch on my scalp was tied to that restlessness. A nervous system looking for grounding. A mind full of quiet stress that had nowhere to go. I've read, since then, that the nerves around the neck and scalp are especially sensitive to emotional strain. That when the body doesn't know how to cry out, it sometimes just itches. Funny how something so small can carry such a heavy message. I started going for walks again. Not the rushed kind I used to take to burn calories, but slower ones just around the block. I left the earbuds behind. Just me and the wind. And you know what I realized? I had been overstimulated for decades. My whole life was noise, radio, meetings, traffic, plans, clocks. Now I had time to listen, but I didn't know how to sit in silence. It was in that silence that I heard myself again. I started journaling at night. Nothing fancy, just a few words. How I felt, what I missed, what I was grateful for. I even wrote down the dreams I could remember. The itching didn't vanish overnight, but the panic around it did. I started to understand it wasn't an enemy, it was a signal. And there's something else I noticed. On the nights I slept better, the itching faded. The days I talked to an old friend or laughed with my grandson, the tension eased. I wasn't scratching so much anymore. I was breathing, feeling, being. People don't talk about that part of aging, the emotional weight of it. We prepare for physical decline, for memory slips and stiff joints. But no one tells you how heavy it feels to wake up in a quiet house where no one needs you urgently anymore. But you're still here, and maybe that's the whole point. That itch behind my ear, that restlessness under my skin. It was my body asking me not to go numb, to stay present, to keep noticing. There's one more itch I remember clearly. It came across my chest and belly, right in the middle of my body, as if the heart and gut were trying to speak at once. At first, I thought it was the new body wash, or the warm weather, but it stuck around. Every evening, around the same time, the skin across my torso would feel tight, dry, and strangely tender. I wasn't eating much those days, just toast and tea in the morning, maybe a can of soup at night. My appetite had changed, and so had my energy. You don't realize how important food is until your body starts begging for something it's not getting. Turns out I was undernourished, not in calories but in nutrients. I wasn't absorbing what I needed. My doctor said older adults sometimes stop digesting well. Our stomach acid decreases, our bodies don't break things down like they used to. We feel full quickly, but we're running on empty. That chest itch, that belly dryness, it was my body waving a little white flag. Feed me, but feed me well. So I made a small promise to myself. Nothing dramatic, just a boiled egg in the morning, some blueberries, a handful of almonds. I started treating food like medicine, not just routine. And slowly, the itching calmed. The lesson wasn't about fear. It was about noticing the way my body asked for what it needed. Subtly, persistently, almost politely. I think most of us just need to listen a little longer before we dismiss what we feel. If you're still with me, leave a comment below. Have you ever had a strange signal from your body you almost ignored, but now you realize it was telling you something important? I'd be honored to hear your story. We're all learning how to listen better, one whisper at a time. I look back now and realize the body rarely lies. It may whisper, it may stumble, it may speak in riddles, but it never lies. At 60, my body had more to say than I was ready to hear. There was a day, clear as spring rain, when I sat in the living room and caught myself scratching at my lower legs again. I'd just come back from a short trip to the grocery store, and as I sat down to untie my shoes, there it was, that same itch, deep, persistent. No redness, no bumps, just a discomfort I couldn't reason with. I remember looking down and thinking, why now? Why here? And then I saw the pattern. It happened more often after I'd been sitting too long. Long drives, long dinners, even church. The itch came when my legs had been still too long, as if they were begging for motion, for blood, for life. I realized I hadn't stood up during that grocery run. I used to move so easily, so naturally, but now even that short outing made me feel compressed somehow. That night I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining my calves. They looked normal, but they didn't feel normal. They felt like they were holding something back, a kind of stagnation. It took another week before I made the connection. My circulation was slowing. Not enough to feel pain, just enough to feel itchy. It's strange, isn't it? The things we ignore simply because they're not dramatic. We wait for chest pains or dizzy spells, but sometimes the first sign is just an itch. Not a threat, but a whisper. I need you to move. I need you to care. So I did. I started with stretches, simple ones. I'd stand in the hallway, raising my heels off the ground, feeling the muscles in my calves awaken like old friends. I took short walks again, even if it was just to the mailbox and back. I elevated my feet when I watched TV, cut down on salt, and drank more water. Slowly, the itching eased. But more than that, I felt responsive, alive, as if I had answered a call before it turned into a crisis. That's something I've learned in old age. Small things grow. They grow quieter if you meet them early. They grow louder if you don't. Now, if we're being honest, the hardest part of aging isn't always physical. Sometimes it's the quiet erosion of attention from others, yes, but also from yourself. You stop checking in. You stop noticing. That's how I'd been treating myself. Like a machine I assumed would keep running just because it always had. I brushed off fatigue, skipped meals, ignored the signs. But the itching forced me to pay attention in ways I hadn't in years. It demanded I be present with my body, not just carry it around like luggage. I remember telling a friend over coffee, an old war buddy of mine, about the itching. He laughed and said, "You're just getting old, Jack." And maybe he was right, but I also think I was getting wiser, because I no longer took discomfort as just annoyance. I started to see it as information. The body will always speak to you. Whether or not you answer, that's up to you. One afternoon, as I was sitting out on the back porch, enjoying the breeze, I noticed another kind of itch. Not on the legs this time, not the scalp, but across my chest. It was faint, but there, persistent. And I noticed something else. I hadn't really eaten anything nourishing all day. A slice of toast in the morning, a bowl of cereal for lunch, nothing of substance. It's funny how easy it is to stop feeding yourself properly when you live alone. You think, what's the point of cooking for one? So you don't. You snack, you graze, you survive. But the body doesn't want survival. It wants to be supported. I started making small changes, not out of fear, but out of respect. A bit of protein in the morning, some green vegetables with dinner, a glass of water before coffee. I wasn't aiming for a diet. I was aiming for dignity. And wouldn't you know it? That itch faded too. Not right away, but within a few weeks, my skin felt different, less brittle. My energy came back slowly, like a sun rising through fog. My memory even sharpened a bit, not perfect but clearer. I started writing letters again, started singing along to old songs when no one was around. Because something in me was being nourished again, not just the body, but the spirit. You see, these itches, they weren't just about skin. They were about what was being neglected, what I'd stopped paying attention to. Each one asked a question. Will you move again? Will you care again? Will you feed yourself, not just with food, but with kindness? That's what I wish someone had told me at 60. That the little signs are rarely little. That the things we brush off as aging might just be life tapping us on the shoulder, saying, there's still time. Don't sleepwalk through it. There's something no one tells you about turning 60. It's not that your body falls apart all at once. No, that's not how it happens. The real change is quieter, so quiet you almost miss it. It's the way your skin starts speaking before your mouth does. The way the itch becomes your body's last polite attempt to get your attention before it resorts to something louder. The last of those itches, the one I almost ignored completely, came from the upper part of my back, between the shoulder blades. A hard place to reach, both physically and emotionally. I chalked it up to dry air, bad posture, maybe even the old wool sweater Mary had knit me years ago. But it was more than that. I noticed it most at night, after the lights were off, after the conversations had stopped. When the house was quiet and I was left with nothing but my thoughts, the itch would rise, soft but insistent. I'd twist and turn, try different sleeping positions, reach for lotion or a cool cloth, but it stayed. It stayed because it wasn't about the surface. It was something deeper. And I think now it was trying to tell me that something inside me, something vital, was under strain. My liver, my kidneys, the quiet engines that had carried me through decades of late nights, heavy meals, stress, and small indulgences. They were asking for a bit of grace. I had never thought much about those parts of myself. Heart? Sure. Lungs? Of course. But the filters, the quiet workers, they didn't get my attention until they whispered through my skin. That's the strange thing about aging. It makes you realize just how many years you've spent taking your own body for granted. I expected it to keep functioning without question, to process everything I gave it, to bounce back like it always did. But after 60, that bounce gets slower, and the price of ignoring small signs gets steeper. The day I finally took it seriously, I'd spent most of the afternoon napping. Something I never used to do. When I woke, I felt heavy in my gut, puffy around the ankles, and that familiar itch was there again. No rest. Just a tightness under the skin, like something trying to surface. I sat at the edge of my bed and thought, this isn't just about itching anymore. I scheduled a checkup reluctantly. Blood work came back. My kidney function was slightly reduced. Liver enzymes were a touch high. Nothing dramatic, but enough to explain what I was feeling. And you know what's remarkable? Once I knew, I didn't feel afraid. I felt relieved, because now I could do something. I could respond, not with panic, but with patience. I made small changes, cut back on the processed food, reduced salt, drank more water than I thought necessary. I let go of that nightly glass of wine I'd grown used to. I read labels. I learned what foods supported the liver, what habits drained the kidneys. I gave those internal parts the same attention I used to give to fixing the fence or changing the oil. And over time, the itch quieted. But more than that, I started sleeping better. I woke up with less fog in my mind, less puffiness in my hands. The aches were still there, don't get me wrong, but they didn't feel so mysterious anymore. I think we all fear what we can't name. But once you name it, once you bring it into the light, it loses some of its power over you. That's what those itches were to me, unnamed messengers. And naming them didn't just help me understand my health. It helped me reclaim my relationship with my body. We spend so many years trying to control our bodies, shape them, discipline them, ignore them when they inconvenience us. But in our later years, there's something healing about shifting from control to companionship. My body wasn't failing me. It was talking to me, and it had been talking for a while. I just hadn't been listening. Now, I take time every morning to do a simple thing. I check in. Not in a medical way, not with fear. Just, how do you feel today, old friend? Sometimes my knees creak louder than usual. Sometimes I feel a tightness behind the eyes. And sometimes there's still a little itch here or there. But I've learned not to push it aside. I ask it gently, what are you trying to say? And often there's an answer. A need for rest, for water, for movement, for connection, for less news and more music. At 60, I didn't know how to ask those questions. I thought paying attention to the body meant weakness. Now, I think it's the deepest form of wisdom we can grow into, because the body is not a burden. It's a conversation, and the older you get, the more precious that conversation becomes. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with a blanket over my knees and let the light fall wherever it pleases. At 80, you don't rush the sun. You wait for it. You welcome it. And in that stillness, I often think back to 60. Not with regret, but with a kind of softness. The kind you only get after walking far enough to look back without flinching. Back then, I didn't understand how quiet the body's warnings could be. I thought danger came with sirens, collapsing pain, hospital rooms, words like emergency. But what I've come to see is that life rarely shouts. It suggests, it hums, it itches. And if you're lucky, if you're just still enough, you catch those murmurs before they turn into storms. That's what all those small discomforts were. Invitations, not punishments, not failures, just reminders. From my legs that needed more movement, from my back that wanted cleaner blood, from my scalp aching for a bit more peace, from my chest craving real nourishment. Each itch led me somewhere I hadn't looked in years, not just inside my body, but inside my living. And isn't that what aging really is? Not a descent, but a deepening? You don't lose your body so much as re-meet it, with all its lines and wear and language. You don't lose purpose, you just find it in smaller, quieter places, like a cup of warm tea, a slow walk past a blooming tree, a phone call you didn't know you needed. I used to fear that life would shrink after retirement, that without work, without schedules, I'd fade into stillness. But I've come to understand, there is a different kind of richness that lives in the slower hours. You just have to stop reaching for what was, and start listening to what is. And the body, bless it, is always part of that listening. I've come to trust it not as something perfect, but as something honest. Partner, a mirror, a bell that rings when I've gone too long without real care. At 60, I ignored those bells. At 80, I hear them in everything. When I forget to drink water, my joints remind me. When I stay up too late, my mind grows cloudy. When I keep too many thoughts to myself, my chest tightens. But here's the grace. I no longer take it personally. I don't shame myself for needing rest, for slowing down, for listening longer before acting. I don't see those itches, those creaks and sighs, as failure. I see them as continuity, proof that I'm still here, still in motion, still in conversation with life. You know, someone asked me recently what I'd go back and tell my 60-year-old self. I didn't even have to think about it. I'd say, don't ignore the whispers, that tiny discomfort, that strange fatigue, that itch that doesn't go away. Listen, not because it's always serious, but because you are, because you're worth paying attention to, because the body is not your enemy, it's your oldest companion. And I'd add this too, be kind to yourself, not in a soft, fluffy way, but in the fiercest, most grounded way you can. Get up and walk, even when you don't feel like it. Eat real food, drink water, sit in the sun, call someone you love, rub lotion into your legs like you're watering a tree you still want to grow, because you are still growing even now, especially now. That, I think, is the greatest wisdom old age has given me. The body doesn't leave you. It waits for you to return, again and again, no matter how long you've ignored it, no matter how far you've wandered from it. Keep speaking, even if all it has left is a whisper, or a little itch. So if you're feeling something small but persistent, don't rush past it. Pause, put a hand there, ask what it needs, and then give it the tenderness you would give to a child or a plant or an old friend who's finally telling you the truth. Because the truth has always been there, waiting just beneath the surface. If you'd like to return, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. It's here, steady and slow, for when you're ready to sit again and listen with me.